my name is Nadia Calloway. I am 38 years old, and on the night of March 14th, a Saturday, at precisely 7:22 in the evening, I walked into Carmine's Italian kitchen in uptown Charlotte carrying three things: a Bluetooth speaker that fit in the palm of my hand, a flash drive the size of a stick of gum, and 9 months of patience I had built so carefully, so quietly, that the man sitting at the head of the birthday table had absolutely no idea any of it existed. There were 14 people in that private dining room. Derek's mother, Patricia, 67 years old, in her good pearl necklace and the cornflower blue dress she saved for special occasions. His brother Elliot, 39, and Elliot's wife Renee, who had always been kinder to me at family gatherings than Elliot was. His best friend Wade, 43, who had covered for Derek at least 11 separate times in the past year, with a fluency that told me the covering had become second nature to him. 3 couples from Derek's firm, Harwick Development Group, a coworker named Gary Polson, who had once put his hand on my shoulder at a company barbecue and told me I was such a lucky woman to have Derek. Our neighbors, the Hendersons, Tom and Carol, who had brought us a lemon cake the first night we moved into the Dilworth house 8 years earlier, and had watched us through the fence ever since. And me, Nadia Calloway, his wife of nearly 10 years, the woman he had called irrational for doubting him, the woman he had called paranoid for noticing things, the woman he had called unstable for trusting her own instincts, the woman he had called on 3 documented occasions crazy. I placed the speaker on the table between the breadbasket and the flower arrangement Patricia had ordered. I plugged the flash drive into the port on its side and watched the small green LED blink on. Then I looked at Derek from the far end of the table, and I smiled. Not a wide smile, not a victorious one, a specific smile, the kind that lives in the corners of a face and carries more meaning than anything that could be said aloud. He did not see it. He was already reaching for his wine glass with one hand and leaning forward into a story he was telling Elliot, already performing the version of himself he had always liked best in public. What he did not know was that the evidence had come from his own car, his own Dashcam, a device he had installed himself for his own purposes, pointed at his own interior, recording his own voice and his own words. What he did not know was that I had been listening for 9 months. What he did not know was that I had a divorce attorney named Danielle Forsyth who had already filed preliminary papers. What he did not know was that I had built a business under my own name in partnership with a woman he had never met, and that business was already generating more income than I had earned in any previous year. What he did not know was that the woman he had spent 2 years convincing she was losing her mind was the most prepared person in that room by a very wide margin. This is that story. To tell it properly, I have to take you back, not to the night I found the Dashcam. Further back than that, to the person I was before I understood what was being done to me and why it took me as long as it did to understand it. Derek Calloway and I met in the summer of 2012 at a mutual friend's cookout in South Park. He was 32 years old then. I was 29. He was broad-shouldered and quietly confident, the kind of man who walks into a room and makes it tilt slightly in his direction without announcing that he has arrived. He was a senior project manager at Harwick Development Group, a commercial real estate firm that had been building office parks and mixed-use developments across both Carolinas for 30 years. He drove a black Audi A6, wore dress shirts in colors that actually worked with his complexion, and had a laugh that arrived without apology and left you wanting to have caused it again. I was a financial analyst at a regional bank downtown, the kind of job that looks boring from the outside and is genuinely absorbing once you understand what is actually happening with money and why. We dated for 2 years with the easy, self-reinforcing momentum of people who appear to want the same things in approximately the same order. We married in October of 2014 at a venue on Lake Norman with 87 guests and string lights strung over the water on a night that stayed warm long past sundown. I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings because she had worn them on her own wedding day 51 years earlier, and I had always believed in that particular kind of continuity. For the first 4 years, Our marriage was unremarkable in the way that most functional marriages are unremarkable. Not perfect. Derek had a tendency to be impatient with small inconveniences, a habit of interrupting when he thought he already knew where a sentence was going, and a way of becoming very quiet and cool when something frustrated him that could last for 2 full days before lifting. But I told myself these were the ordinary rough edges of a driven man, the friction you accept when you marry someone who cares deeply about results. We bought a house in the Dilworth neighborhood in 2016, a 4-bedroom craftsman with a wraparound porch and a magnolia tree in the backyard that bloomed every April and dropped petals across the entire yard until the middle of June. I planted a kitchen garden along the south-facing fence. We had people over on Sunday evenings. We talked about children without arriving at a decision. We were, by every external measure, a couple building something real. In 2018, I left my banking position to build my own financial consulting practice, working specifically with small business owners on planning, cash flow management, and growth strategy. I had 3 clients to start. Derek was initially supportive. "You're too smart to work for someone else forever," he told me one evening in March, sitting at our kitchen island. "Build something of your own." So I did. I built slowly and carefully, the way you build when the only net beneath you is your own competence. By the end of 2019, I had 11 clients and a modest but growing presence in Charlotte's small business community. But as my practice grew, something in Derek began to change. The support did not disappear all at once. It curdled. Gradually and almost imperceptibly, the way milk turns in a closed refrigerator. By 2020, the phrase he used most often when he referred to my work was, "your little business," said always with a slight tonal qualifier that made the word little do more work than the word business. My clients became an inconvenience to our schedule. My networking dinners became a subject of mild resentment. My income, which had grown to $64,000 that year, was something he discussed as a rounding error against his own earnings. When I pointed out that $64,000 was not a rounding error, he would look at me with an expression I came to recognize over time as something specific and deliberate. Head slightly tilted, eyes patient and concerned. "I'm not dismissing it, Nadia," he would say. "I'm just worried about you. You're stretching yourself too thin and I can see it." He was always worried about me, and over time I began to wonder if he was right. The pattern had a shape. I can see it clearly now. Derek was not an obvious abuser. He did not yell. He did not threaten. What he did was quieter and more deliberate. He reclassified my perceptions. When I felt something, he returned it to me as a malfunction. When I noticed something, he reinterpreted it as evidence of a problem with my capacity to notice correctly. When I raised a concern, he responded not to the concern itself, but to the fact that I had a concern, as if the existence of the concern was the actual problem that needed to be addressed. Let me give you 3 specific examples, because I want you to understand this was not something I constructed in retrospect. These things happened precisely as I am about to describe them. In October of 2021, I was hanging up Derek's jacket on a Saturday morning when a paper slipped out of the inside pocket. A receipt from Dressler's restaurant, a Tuesday 3 weeks earlier. The total was $247.60. Dressler's was not a lunch spot. The receipt showed a table for 2. Check closed at 9:41 in the evening. Derek had told me he was working late that Tuesday. When I showed him the receipt, his expression did not change, not by a fraction. He said, "I took Gary out. He's going through a rough time, and I didn't think it was my story to share. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd read into it. That's what I mean, Nadia. You look for evidence of things that aren't there." He said it gently, like a man delivering a caring truth. I put the receipt in the kitchen drawer. 2 months later, at a holiday party at Harwick, I was speaking with Gary's wife Sandra. She mentioned that Gary had spent most of October working from home with a herniated disc, including, she said, a Tuesday she remembered specifically because Gary had been in too much pain to walk to the kitchen. I smiled. I changed the subject. I went home and put that information somewhere cold and still inside me, next to the receipt. In February of 2022, Derek began coming home after 11 at night consistently on Wednesdays and Thursdays. He said Harwick had a new development project in Mooresville requiring evening coordination through the spring. I gave it 2 weeks before I mentioned it. I asked him once, carefully, if I could see his project schedule so I could plan around his availability. He handed me his phone with the screen already off. Then he said, I didn't realize my work schedule required spousal approval. Nadia, this monitoring, this underlying distrust, it wears on a marriage. It wears on me. I handed the phone back. I said, I'm sorry. You're right. And I despised myself for 3 days afterward for those 2 words. In May of 2022, a client of mine named Marcus Webb mentioned my name to the organizers of the Charlotte Business Summit, a regional professional conference with roughly 400 attendees. The organizers reached out and asked if I would present a 30-minute session on financial planning for growth stage small businesses. I brought it up to Derek at dinner that night. He listened. Then he said, I think you need to be careful about how much you take on. You get overwhelmed, Nadia. Remember the Raleigh conference? You were anxious for weeks after that. You don't need to keep proving things. The Raleigh conference had been a half-day panel 2 years before. I had been nervous one morning, delivered well, received positive feedback, and gained 3 clients from it. He had taken 1 human morning of pre-presentation nerves and constructed a permanent behavioral record from it. I did not submit my name for the Charlotte Business Summit. I did not understand until much later that I had allowed someone to quietly edit my life on my behalf. This was the world I was living in. Not dramatically, not obviously, but steadily and with a precision that I can only appreciate now that I have distance from it. Everything changed on a Thursday evening in the last week of June of 2022. Derek had taken his car to Premier Auto Detail on South Boulevard for a full interior clean. He asked me to pick it up because the shop closed at 6, and he had a partner's call at Harwick that would run until at least 7. I picked it up at 5:19, paid $162, and merged back toward Dilworth. About 2 minutes into the drive, something caught my eye in the windshield. A device mounted in the upper left corner behind the rearview mirror. Small, black, a dash cam. I had never seen it before. At the next red light, I reached up and touched it. There was a small amber LED blinking steadily. On the side, Vantru. When I got home, I looked up the model. Vantru N4. 3-channel. Front, interior, rear. Default settings recorded audio automatically whenever the car was in motion. Footage wrote to a micro SD card, approximately 72 hours of capacity before overwriting. I sat in Derek's Audi in our own driveway for 11 minutes. I did not touch the camera again. I went inside. I made dinner. I poured wine. I listened to Derek describe the Mooresville project partners throughout dinner, and I asked reasonable follow-up questions. I washed the dishes while he watched television in the adjacent room. Then I went to bed. I lay awake for 2 hours and 31 minutes. And in that time, very quietly, I made a decision about what kind of woman I was going to be from that point forward. Over the following 2 weeks, I observed Derek's routine with the dashcam carefully. He swapped the micro SD card every 4 to 5 days, always in the car, usually when he first got in to leave for work. He would slip the used card into his jacket pocket or leave it in the center console. He was not careful about this because he did not know I was watching it. On a Monday morning, 3 weeks after I had first noticed the camera, while Derek was in the upstairs shower, I retrieved the most recently used card from the inside pocket of his gray blazer, which was hanging on the back of the bedroom door. I went to my office. I have an SD card reader I use for memory cards from a camera I take on client site visits. I inserted the card. I copied every audio file on it into a folder I created on my laptop and named Tax Documents Backup 2019. Then I returned the card to his jacket pocket. Total elapsed time, 14 minutes. Derek came downstairs, poured his coffee, kissed me on the cheek as he passed the kitchen island, and left for work. He had no idea. He never did. What was on those files changed everything I thought I knew and confirmed everything I had been told not to think. The first file I listened to was from a Wednesday 3 weeks prior, 11:41 in the evening by the timestamp. Derek's voice, alone in the car, on a Bluetooth phone call. The woman he was speaking to, he called Cass. His voice on that recording was not the voice I shared a bed with. It was warmer, looser. The voice of a man who had just spent several hours being exactly who he actually wanted to be. I heard him say, "I hate leaving you." I heard him say, "I told her I had a site visit. She believes everything I tell her." And then I heard him say something I have turned over many times since. He said, "She's been off lately anyway. Running around with her little business makes it easier." He laughed. 4 seconds. I counted because counting was the only way I knew to stay still inside that moment rather than dissolve into it. I played that section 9 times. Not because I was uncertain. I was certain the moment I heard it. I played it 9 times because I was making a decision, a permanent and irrevocable one, about what kind of woman I was going to be going forward. I did not want to be the woman who reacted. I wanted to be the woman who responded. There is a distance between those two things that is exactly the size of your future. Over the following 3 weeks, I copied 11 additional audio files from 4 separate SD cards. By the end of July, I had a folder containing 214 minutes of documentation, dates, times, names, conversations that painted a picture so complete and specific that there was no version of events in which I had been wrong. I organized the files by date. I created a written log noting the timestamp of each significant exchange. I backed the folder to an encrypted external drive I stored at my office behind a panel of books. Then I made an appointment I told no one about. On the 8th of July, a Friday, at 10:15 in the morning, I sat across from Danielle Forsyth in the conference room of Forsyth and Mercer Family Law on East Trade Street in Charlotte. Danielle was 45 years old, precise, with reading glasses she wore pushed up on her head when she was not using them. I described 9 months of behavioral pattern in detail. I played her 2 of the audio files. She listened without interrupting, without any visible reaction. When the second file ended, she set her reading glasses on the legal pad and said, "North Carolina is an equitable distribution state. Do you have any sense of the marital asset picture?" I placed a 6-page document on the table. She read it in 4 minutes. She looked up. "You've been busy," she said. "I've been paying attention," I said. We scheduled a follow-up meeting for the following week. I drove home, made dinner, and watched Derek eat it with the appetite of a man who had no idea that the conversation he had been dreading for months had already begun, without him, in a conference room on East Trade Street. I met with Danielle 3 more times over August. On each occasion, the picture became sharper, the legal position clearer. I needed my own financial infrastructure to be solid and independently documented before any proceedings accelerated, which meant I needed to stop thinking of my consulting practice as secondary and start treating it as the primary foundation of the life I was about to build alone. In August, my client Marcus Webb introduced me to a woman named Patricia Osei. Patricia was 42, an accountant who had been running her own small business financial services practice for 15 years, primarily serving clients in Charlotte's Noda and Plaza Midwood neighborhoods. We had coffee for the first time on a Tuesday morning at 10:30. Patricia spent 20 minutes listening to my description of my practice and then said, with a directness that startled me pleasantly, "We are doing the same work in the same geography for the same clients. Why are we separate?" I had no good answer. 3 meetings later, we had agreed on a structure. We registered O.C. Callaway Financial Consulting, LLC on August 29th. The business account was opened in both our names the following week. Our first-year revenue projections showed a combined client base generating a minimum of $230,000. We had 22 businesses at registration and 2 letters of intent from prospective clients waiting to sign. I did not tell Derek the firm existed. I built it in silence. Silence had been my home for 2 years. I decided to make it my workshop. If you are still watching, I want to stop here for a moment and ask you something. Drop a single word in the comments below. Just one word that describes what you are feeling right now. I read every comment, every single one, and your responses have stayed with me long after I have read them. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do that right now. Because what comes next is the part I have been building toward for 9 months, and I do not want you to miss it. Derek turned 42 on March 14th. His mother, Patricia, had been planning a birthday dinner in his honor since mid-January. She booked the private dining room at Carmine's Italian Kitchen on South Tryon Street. 14 guests. Family, colleagues, neighbors. The people whose opinion Derek valued most in the world. When Patricia called me to coordinate in the second week of February, she asked if I would handle the birthday cake and the AV setup for a short photo slideshow she had assembled. I told her it would be my pleasure. She said, "Nadia, I honestly don't know what I would do without you. You hold everything together." I thanked her sincerely. I meant those words differently than she intended them. The preliminary divorce papers had been filed by Danielle in early February. A process server delivered them to Derek at the Harwick offices on March 2nd, just after noon. Derek called me 43 minutes later. His voice was controlled, but I could hear precisely what lived beneath the control. He said, "Nadia, I just received some kind of paperwork. I think there's been a mistake. We need to talk when I get home." I said, "Of course, I'll be here." He arrived at 6:17. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, and I could see him assembling the approach in real time. He said, "Whatever you think you know, you don't have the full picture." He said, "Every marriage goes through hard seasons. This doesn't have to be the end of something good." And then he said the thing I had been waiting for. He said, "I'm worried about you, Nadia. You haven't seemed like yourself for months. I think you need to speak with someone. I think this decision is coming from a place that isn't healthy." There it was. Still. The last card in a deck he had been playing from for 2 years. My clarity as onus. My decision as symptom. I said, "I think we should let things settle before we talk through the details." He nodded slowly, with the private confidence of a man who believed he had purchased enough time to reverse what was happening. He thought I was wavering. He thought I was still the woman who had handed back his phone and apologized for being curious. I allowed him that thought. It was the last thing I allowed him. In the 12 days between the papers and the birthday dinner, Derek remained in the house. He suggested couples counseling. He brought flowers on 2 occasions. Tulips the first time, gardenias the second, which had always been my favorite and which I put in water on the kitchen windowsill without comment. He mentioned more than once that Patricia's birthday dinner was still on, and that he hoped we could be present together for her sake. I agreed that Patricia's dinner was important. I told him I would absolutely be there. He seemed genuinely relieved. He should not have been. On the evening of March 14th, I dressed in the spare bedroom. I had bought a dark green wrap dress in January specifically for this night and kept it in a dry cleaning bag in the closet of the room where no one went. My grandmother's pearl earrings, simple nude heels, my hair loose and smoothed. I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time, not adjusting, just looking. It was the first time in several years that the woman in the mirror felt entirely inhabited. I picked up my bag. The flash drive was in the front zip pocket. The speaker was in a cloth tote beside the door. I had run the audio test 3 separate times that week in my office with the door closed. The files played cleanly at a room-filling volume. Everything was exactly as I needed it to be. I arrived at Carmine's at 6:43, 39 minutes before Derek was due. The private dining room was past the bar, through a heavy curtain at the back of the restaurant. Patricia and Elliot were already there arranging centerpieces. I greeted them warmly and with complete composure. I set up the AV equipment on the credenza below the screen, connecting the speaker's audio output to the room's input jack as if I were simply loading the slideshow. Patricia came over to check on me. I told her everything was handled. She pressed my hand between both of hers and said, "What would this family do without you?" I smiled back and said nothing. By 7:22, every seat was filled. Bread had arrived. Wine had been poured. Derek sat at the head of the table, relaxed and expansive, deep into a story about a permitting dispute that had Elliot and Wade laughing. He caught my eye once across the length of the table, the familiar scan, reading me for information about where I was emotionally. I gave him nothing. I held his gaze for 2 seconds, smiled briefly, and looked away. He looked away first. Patricia stood to give a toast. She spoke about Derek's character and dedication and the little boy he had been. Her voice caught near the end, the way it does when love is sincere enough to be embarrassing in public. She said, "And we are so lucky to have Nadia in this family. She is a woman who holds everything together without ever being asked twice." She looked at me when she said it, and the warmth in her face was entirely genuine. I held her gaze and felt the full weight of what was about to happen. Patricia had not wronged me. She had loved her son too completely to see him clearly, and that was not a crime. What was about to happen would cost her something. I knew it, and I let myself sit inside that knowledge for the 30 seconds before I stood up. When Patricia sat down, I rose. The room settled into the natural assumption of a spousal toast. I said, "Thank you so much, Patricia. I have a few words, too." I reached into my tote bag and set the speaker on the table between the breadbasket and the centerpiece. I plugged the flash drive in. Someone on the other side of the table set down their fork. I said, "I know how much everyone in this room loves Derek. I know how much Derek values each of you. So I want to make sure everyone here is working from the same information that I have." I pressed play. Derek's voice came through the speaker at the volume of a man who believed absolutely that he was alone. "I hate leaving you." I told her I had a site visit. She believes everything I tell her. She's been off lately anyway, running around with her little business. Makes it easier. Then the laugh. 4 full seconds of it. I let it run until it finished. Then I pressed pause. The silence that followed was the most complete silence I have ever occupied. Not one person moved. Not one glass shifted. Patricia's hand, which had been extended toward her wine glass, stopped completely in midair. Elliot was looking at Derek. Renee was looking at the tablecloth. Wade was staring at a fixed point somewhere past my shoulder with an expression that was working very hard not to be any specific thing. Gary Polson had both palms flat on the table as if he needed the table to stay where it was. Tom Henderson was looking at his wife Carol. Carol was looking at me. I played a second clip. A different evening, 3 weeks later. Derek's voice again, warmer, more relaxed, saying a name that every person in that room heard clearly. I let it run for 40 seconds. Then I pressed pause. I removed the flash drive. I looked down the table at Derek and I said, "Your own Dashcam, Derek. The one you installed yourself." My voice was level, unhurried. I sat back down. I placed my napkin in my lap. I picked up my water glass. My hands did not shake. They had not shaken once during the entire evening. Derek's face was the color of old chalk. His wine glass was still half raised from Patricia's toast, suspended in his hand, as if the signal from his brain to set it down had been interrupted. Patricia had gone entirely still. She was looking at her son with an expression I do not have clean language for. It was not rage. It was not simple shock. It was the expression of a woman who has been loving something for 42 years and is now being asked in public to see it as it actually is. She said one word. His name. Derek. Quietly. He did not respond. He was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before, the expression of a man who had been absolutely certain of his own control and is watching that certainty evaporate in front of the precise people whose opinion he had organized his entire self-presentation around. Wade stood before anyone else. He said, "I need some air," and walked out without meeting anyone's eyes. The heavy curtain swung behind him. Renee put her hand on Elliot's on the tablecloth. Gary had not moved. The couples from Harwick exchanged glances so swift and charged they communicated entire conversations without a word. The room had been reorganized completely and permanently, and every person in it understood that nothing could now be walked back. I excused myself without drama. I thanked Patricia sincerely for organizing such a beautiful evening. I told her the birthday cake was confirmed, arriving from the bakery on Selwyn Avenue at 8:30 as planned. I picked up my tote bag. I walked out of Carmine's Italian kitchen at 7:58 in the evening and into the March night, which was cool and clean and smelled like the city after recent rain. I breathed it in. I walked to my car in the adjacent parking deck. I sat in the driver's seat for 4 minutes without starting the engine, not collecting myself. I did not need collecting. I was already whole. I was simply pausing, the way you pause at the end of something you have worked toward for a very long time, to let the fact of its completion settle. Then I started the car and drove home. Derek did not come home that night. Between 9 and 11 in the evening, my phone registered 6 calls from his number. I did not answer. Between 11 and 2 in the morning, 11 text messages arrived. I read each one completely. The first several were defensive. That was taken completely out of context. You deliberately humiliated me in front of my family. This is the kind of behavior I have been trying to talk to you about. Then, somewhere around midnight, the framing shifted. I'm sorry. Please answer the phone. I know I hurt you. I know what I did. I read all 11. I set the phone face down on the nightstand. I slept better than I had in 2 years. Derek moved to a hotel on East Independence Boulevard the following morning. Our respective attorneys met for the first time on a gray Tuesday at the end of March in Danielle Forsythe's conference room on East Trade Street. Derek had retained a lawyer named Carl Meredith, who wore expensive cufflinks and spoke in the deliberate rhythm of a man who understood that time spent speaking in his direction was time being billed. Derek sat across from me and could not hold my gaze for more than a few seconds. He attempted once, early in the meeting, to raise the subject of my state of mind and my pattern of behavior as relevant context. Danielle looked at her legal pad. I looked at Derek. He stopped mid-sentence and did not return to it. There was nothing left to build that sentence from. Patricia called me 10 days after the dinner. I answered because Patricia had not wronged me and deserved to be answered. She had been crying, but this was the quieter side of it, the careful remainder after the main event. She said, "Nadia, I am so sorry. I had absolutely no idea." She said, "That is not how I raised him." I told her I believed her, and I meant it without reservation. She said, "How were you so calm in that room? How did you sit there like that?" I thought about how to answer her honestly. Then I said, because I had 9 months to feel everything I needed to feel in private before I walked into that room. By the time I sat down at that table, there was nothing left to panic about. It had already happened inside me. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something I had not expected. "You are a remarkable woman, Nadia." I always thought so. I thanked her. We said goodbye with a gentleness that surprised us both. The legal settlement took 4 months to finalize. The equitable distribution of the marital assets was exactly what Danielle had projected. The Dilworth house was listed in May at $1,070,000. It sold in 8 days. The magnolia tree was in full bloom during the first walkthrough. The buyers told the realtor it was what decided them. I found that deeply appropriate, in the way that only things that cannot be planned feel appropriate when they arrive. Here is what I understand now, in the long quiet that follows a decision of this magnitude. Composure is not the absence of emotion. It is the discipline of knowing what to do with emotion and when. I spent 2 years in a marriage where my most reliable instrument, my perception, my body's knowledge, my own reading of a room, was being methodically returned to me as a symptom. I spent 2 years apologizing for instincts that were correct. I spent 2 years making myself a question mark in my own life. And I want to be honest about the fact that this did not happen because I was weak. It happened because the person doing it was skilled, consistent, and had identified that the most effective way to manage someone is to make them doubt themselves before they have a chance to see you clearly. That is the mechanism. That is exactly how it works. I want you to hear me say it plainly, because the most dangerous thing about it is that it does not feel like what it is while you are inside it. It feels like love that is trying to help you. But here's what else I know. The time between knowing and acting is not lost time. It is the most valuable time there is. It is the time when you become someone the other person cannot manage. I used those 9 months to build a legal case, a business, a financial foundation, and an unshakable clarity about what I was holding when I walked into Carmine's that evening. Every card I copied, every audio file I organized, every meeting with Danielle that Derek did not know about. Every morning with Patricia Osei building the structure of what Osei Callaway would become. Every draft of the business plan, every client conversation. I built all of it in silence, and when I was ready, I used his own voice to do the speaking for me. I did not accuse him. I did not argue. I did not ask anyone in that room to choose a side. I simply made the truth audible, in his words, in a room full of witnesses. And then I walked out into the cool March night and breathed the clean air and went home. To anyone watching this who is living in something like what I lived in, who has been called irrational for having instincts, who has apologized for noticing things, who has been made to feel that the problem is not the thing happening but the fact that you are registering it. I want to say this as directly as I can. Your body keeps score before your mind can name the number. That knowledge in your stomach that has been there for months, that quiet accumulation of small wrongnesses that you have been explaining away, that is not malfunction, that is information. And what you do with information is never nothing. You document, you build, you wait. You become the most prepared person in the room. And then you let the truth do what truth does when it is finally allowed to exist in a room that cannot look away from it. Danielle Forsyth called me the day after the legal settlement was finalized to congratulate me. I thanked her. She said, "Most of my clients come to me in crisis and leave in exhaustion. You're the first one in a while who arrived already prepared." I told her it was because I had spent 2 years learning that preparation was the only language available to me. She said, "Well, you speak it fluently." I thought about that on the drive home. Preparation is fluency. Building in silence is fluency. Staying composed when every instinct in your body wants to explode is fluency. I had been practicing that language for 9 months without knowing I was becoming fluent in it. But I was. I am. That was the moment I stopped being someone's wife who also had a business, and started becoming the woman my grandmother's pearl earrings had always been waiting to belong to. Osei Callaway Financial Consulting signed our 5th major client in November of last year, a regional hospitality group based in Ballantyne with 11 properties across the Carolinas. Patricia Osei and I have 4 full-time staff members and are building out a second office space on the 3rd floor of the building on North Tryon Street. My grandmother's pearl earrings are on my dresser right now, next to a photograph of Patricia and me at the firm's launch reception in October. I look at them every morning, not as a reminder of who I was married to, as a record of who I chose to become when I stopped asking anyone else's permission. Here's my question for you, and I ask it with complete sincerity because your answers stay with me long after I read them. Have you ever had to choose between staying quiet to keep the peace and speaking up to keep yourself? And if you chose to stay quiet, what was the cost? Tell me in the comments. I want to know. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending this time here with me today. To every person who has watched this story all the way to the end, who sat with Nadia through all 9 months of it, who felt something in their chest during the parts that were meant to land there. This channel exists because of you. Revenge Chronicles was built for women who were told their instincts were inconvenient, their perceptions too dramatic, their ambitions too much for the space they were standing in. None of that was ever true. Not for Nadia. Not for the women whose stories we tell here every single week. And not for you. Every comeback we carry on this channel was built in silence first. That is the real engine of every story we tell. Quiet, deliberate, dignified action, taken by women who refused to let what was done to them become the final word. If this story moved something in you, if any part of it felt true, please subscribe, hit the bell so you never miss an episode, and share this with one woman who needs to hear it today. She may not tell you why it matters, she will just know. We are here every week, without exception, with a new story, and we will see you in the next one. The comeback is always coming.